The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If you've been troubled over the recent flare-up involving ISIS in Iraq and Syria, if you've been wondering what is the long-term solution, what is the future of this conflict, and what does it entail for the U.S., what would a successful resolution be? Let me calm your fears by letting you know that Bill O'Reilly, Fox News host, has provided what he considers to be a plan to defeat ISIS. Now, unfortunately, it's a completely ridiculous plan in the sense that it's already more or less what is being done, but different enough in the wording that Bill O'Reilly could either take or disclaim responsibility, depending on how the program actually how it actually results. This is Bill O'Reilly on CBS this morning. He was on there to promote his new book, Killing Patton, which, by the way, we've talked about the absurdity of Bill O'Reilly being one of the best-selling history authors in the U.S. right now, and he espoused what he considers to be a really great plan for defeating ISIS. Check it out.
Last night you offered an idea that some say is very unique on your show. You called for a mercenary army to defeat ISIS. How would that work?
Under congressional approval and authority, the United States would train and pay well mercenary troops from all over the world. We would select them. The special forces would train them, 25,000-man force, to be deployed to fight on the ground against worldwide terrorism, not just ISIS. And that would be a permanent force. And it would take the politics out of it. What's killing the West now in this fight on terror, and Putin as well, is the politics of it. Can't get anything done quickly, can't mobilize fast. So it's going to happen.
So the plan does sound pretty similar to what the White House is already doing, right? Training so-called moderate Syrian fighters in Saudi Arabia. It's part of this $500 million plan that was approved by Congress recently, although it's only set to be a 5,000-person force. But this is so absurd to me, Lewis, because on the one hand, Bill O'Reilly is kind of recommending what is already being done. And of course, we know that the U.S. has a long history of arming fighting forces in other countries, which eventually we end up fighting against. We know about that. We have a long history of that. So it's absurd that Bill O'Reilly, on the one hand, is suggesting something that is basically being done, but saying President Obama didn't do it soon enough. But he's also framing it in a way where if it doesn't work, if you go back to Bill O'Reilly, he'll still say, yeah, I had a plan. My plan wasn't actually done.
Yeah, his plan involves, what did he say, 25,000 people?
I think so.
Yeah, and I just don't think it's a good idea to pull these people from all over the place, spend lots of money to train them and arm them, and then send this unsupervised, apolitical force into a country to just shoot up whatever.
And it's interesting because it's a representation, it's a microcosm of basically every right-wing plan for anything, which is say something that sounds super simple, and it actually makes no sense whatsoever. So with taxes, right? Taxes are a burden. We need tax relief. We need to lower taxes. That's really simple. That sounds really good. It ignores the realities of what is funded through taxes and the realities of what would happen if we didn't have that tax revenue. It's essentially the same type of thing. Hey, let's just act quickly, arm a mercenary force with elite fighters that are trained by U.S. Special Forces, and we'll fight terror around the world. And of course, we've been so-called fighting terror around the world for something like 13 years now at the minimum. It's called the Global War on Terror. It hasn't been going particularly well, has it?
It has not. And there seems to be a leaf blower going on out here. Hopefully no one can hear that. But no. And, you said that these would be elite troops. I don't even know if that's the case. These could end up being the equivalent of ISIS fighters who just sign up for something, get handed a gun and a little bit of training, and get sent off to do whatever.
Yesterday, when we reported to you the press release from the government, from the Pentagon, announcing the strikes against ISIS in Syria and Iraq, I mentioned that at the bottom of that press release, there was a very short sentence that alluded to the fact that in conjunction with these attacks on the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, the U.S. also conducted some dozen or so strikes against a group called the Khorasan group, previously a group that Americans had been told not very much about, and a group that is disconnected. It is a completely separate incursion from that against ISIS. And we speculated yesterday, Lewis, is this just an opportunity from the U.S. government to go after someone they've been targeting for a while under the umbrella of military action generally in the area? Is this some kind of a distraction? Is this fulfilling some other kind of political goal? And we now are starting to get more and more reports about this Khorasan group. And before yesterday's announcement of this military action, the American Tomahawk missiles were not focused, at least to our knowledge, on this group, the Khorasan group. And U.S. intelligence agencies claim to have been tracking this group's movement for years, but until now, the White House had not chosen to take military action. And as it happened, the attacks on the Islamic State finally have created a reasonable pretext, or at least reasonably reasonable, if that term makes any sense, to go after the Khorasan group. And the Syrian airstrikes have obviously raised questions of, if the Khorasan group truly posed a significant, imminent, and real threat to the American homeland before the flare-up of ISIS, why didn't we already go up against them? Why didn't we already strike them? And if it's not true that they actually pose this level of a threat, then what is the real reason for which we're going after them now? Something, Lewis, about the timing and about the messaging on this is not making total sense to me.
I think that if we are, in fact, going after this group, who knows if we're conducting any airstrikes against this group at all, I think that they are telling, our government is telling us this because they want these strikes and this action to appear as if it's helping us somehow. In addition to helping the Syrian people, the Iraqi people.
And do you believe that maybe what's going on is that there has not really been a credible case made that ISIS presents a threat to the homeland, and thus this is kind of being rolled in to make it a more appealing total package of strikes?
Even ISIS claims that they do not have the intention of attacking the United States, at least not right now. They've laid out their mission and their goals, and that is to take over certain places very far away from us. So I think that we just needed to throw in something to make it seem like we're being kept safe. And this group that I've never heard of, that you've never heard of, seems to be kind of the scapegoat for that.
Well, any group that has one bomb, that has one missile, that has one rocket launcher, could create chaos, could shoot down a plane, right? Could kill people. But should we be bombing all of those groups? Is it the responsibility of the U.S.? Is it prudent and logical? And I recognize that if one of these small groups, like the Khorasan group, if they do commit an act of terror, if they do kill people, and the U.S. knew about them and did not act, there will be criticisms, right? There's absolutely no question of that. But many of these groups, while distinct in their makeup, right, their location, their capabilities, the population that makes them up, they are really fundamentally ideologies. And I question, broadly speaking, and I've been questioning this for a really long time if you've been paying attention to our show at all, I question whether more bombs, Lewis, can eradicate an ideology, or whether more bombs foment the ideologies we're really trying to stamp out.
It could go either way. Certainly in Iraq, it did not help. We created more terrorists by using bombs and by sending troops. And I hope that's not what happens here.
Send me your thoughts on this. What do you think about this carefully worded, bottom of the release mention that we're also going after this other group, which we haven't even talked to you about in the past? Actress Emma Watson, on September 21st, who is also a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador, stood up at the United Nations headquarters in New York City and gave a speech that condemned the harm that gender discrimination causes for both men and women, and invited men to become more active participants in the global struggle for equality. The next day, anonymous individuals set up a website supposedly targeting Emma Watson with sexual threats and a countdown meant to be believed to be a countdown to when nude pictures supposedly stolen from Emma Watson would be released. Initially, some users on the 4chan message board took credit for creating the website, which features the 4chan logo. We have now found out, Lewis, that as of right now, as of just before we went to broadcast today, it appears that it is not 4chan that is responsible for this website and these threats, but rather a marketing stunt by a company called Rantic, who has as a goal that they are working on shutting down 4chan altogether. So it appears, Lewis, that a very serious situation here, which is Emma Watson making a logical, a well-reasoned speech, a speech that has actually inflamed many so-called men's rights activists when she was not advocating for women's rights over men's rights. She was not advocating pro-feminist so-called militant propaganda, the term we hear from these men's rights groups at all, but simply saying we need men engaged in the battle for gender equality and eliminating gender discrimination. This is very serious stuff, and the backlash is a very serious and real thing. And a viral marketing group that has the goal of eliminating 4chan takes this as an opportunity to throw Emma Watson in. I find this to be pretty distasteful.
Of course, but it's just business as usual, isn't it? This is, it's clever, I guess, in a way, capitalizing on those recent events, but business as usual. Yeah,
more or less. And in spite of the fact, I want to make clear, in spite of the fact that the threats were not coming from 4chan, but rather from this viral marketing group Rantic, the response from many so-called men's rights activists was very positive to this, saying we should be releasing nude pictures of Emma Watson because she's speaking out, preaching this pro-feminist nonsense, and she deserves to be punished, which is amazing because the fact that that was the response from many individuals actually proves that we need people like Emma Watson and others taking this issue of gender discrimination seriously. In other words, we have someone who speaks out about issues of gender discrimination, and all of a sudden people are talking about her individual sexual history and cheering for the potential release of nude pictures, which were in this imaginary world created by Rantic, stolen from her illegally. It actually proves that this is a serious issue.
It is a serious issue, and for people like Emma Watson, this must be one of the most infuriating and aggravating battles to have to try and fight.
We're used to hearing a lot in the U.S. about Mexican corruption and Mexican crime and the dangers of Mexican drug cartels and the murders committed by them. We're used to hearing that quite a bit. And we're also used to hearing about how in the U.S. we need to be able to protect ourselves from dangerous Mexican immigrants with guns very often. And we now have a very interesting study which may come as a surprise to some of our audience, maybe not to everybody. We often talk about how easy it is to obtain guns in the U.S., and we've talked about how in spite of having strict gun control laws in Chicago, it's very easy to drive 45 minutes over the border into Indiana and buy guns and just bring them back over to the population center of Chicago and commit crimes with them. Well, we now have a study that looked at 8,540 weapons that were confiscated and traced by the PGR in Mexico to find their origin. And lo and behold, Lewis, 70% of those confiscated 8,540 weapons have been traced back to the United States. This is interesting on many levels. One, we know that the U.S. has this long and troubling history of officially and unofficially, but at the government level, funding with weapons all sorts of different groups all over the world that often we end up having to then fight against. We know that. We know about the U.S. policy of funding dictators. We know about all that. But now we're talking about really kind of at the black market level, not at the government level, because of, as a side effect of the lax gun safety laws of the United States, we see that these guns are going to Mexico and then actually being used by those same pro-gun forces in the U.S. to stimulate gun sales because we need to defend ourselves from the dangerous Mexicans. It is amazing, Lewis, that yet again we see how, number one, the gun sales lobby benefits from general fear of violence being committed with guns, but we now have the facts on the ground, and 70%, Lewis, of those guns coming from here.
Our guns are everywhere, aren't they? And it wouldn't surprise me. I know we've talked about how our government has worked with cartels allowed certain amount of drugs over the border. Who knows if our government has even supplied cartels with weapons? And, you know, that makes up probably a certain percentage of the weapons we're talking about here. And
as tragic as the stories of the grandfather who shot someone who was turning around in his driveway because he thought it was some kind of person committing crime, those stories are absolutely tragic. But this is a huge, broader issue, which is the ease with which U.S. weapons can be obtained and moved even to other countries and then used to wreak havoc on Americans and on others. We're going to keep covering this, no question about it. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. A lot happening on today's program. Glad you're with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberalbias.com is now presenting weekly videos on the Liberal Bias YouTube channel. Check out Liberal Bias Video to learn all the ways in which reality has a liberal bias. Today's new member of the day is Sam Miller. Sam Miller Lewis, of course, asking many excellent questions on the David Pakman Show town halls. Former or current Massachusetts member where the program formerly was based. So congratulations to Sam. You are member of the day today. You can join Sam and support this program. Vote with your dollars. This is really a democratic endeavor. We exist only because people vote with their dollars to support our show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. It's Wednesday. It's time for Hatriot Mail.
Hatriot Mail, your break from the tyranny of unbiased, independent media. Because knowledge and information are just communist conspiracies. Hatriot Mail, written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So this week, in the spirit of the conspiracies that we are, conspiracy theorists and conspiracists that we've been dealing with lately, including the guy I interviewed on the subject of chemtrails, accusing me of being controlled opposition and having paymasters. By the way, we're still waiting for some evidence of that. We are going to dive in very deeply here today, Lewis, into a conspiratorial voicemail, Hatriot Mail. And I warn you, this is going pretty deep into some serious conspiracies. Let's take a listen. Here we go.
To say that David has no clue is to understate the calculated, relentless implementation of the protocols of the Elder Zion. Google it. Try to find just one talking point missed on this channel. Go point by point and you will see for yourselves. Rotter than throwing troll or crazy as a retort. Actually go and look.
Yeah.
Maybe it is just a coincidence that David marches in complete lockstep with a very diabolical plan to enslave mankind. Reverse trolls begin. Don't say anything until you have actually looked and compared David's talking points with the protocols. Fascinating stuff to witness. Scary.
So, Lewis, the protocols of the Elder Zion, which of course I think if I translate from Hatriot to English, is the protocols of the Elders of Zion, a long-time anti-Semitic conspiracy dating back, I believe, to the 19th century, if I recall correctly, in, I don't remember now if it's Russia or Germany. In any case, we're really going deep here in the conspiracies that are being attached to this program.
We are. We keep getting deeper, going further down the rabbit hole, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I don't know what else we can really say about it, but it's certainly been a conspiratorial couple of weeks here on the David Pakman Show. Oh, I'm sorry. One of my strings that's attached to my Puppet Master, Lewis, was just pulled a little too tight, and I flinched. I apologize about that. I hope the strings aren't visible on camera. Texas has moved to veto AP history. Texas has moved forward with an effort to now veto the advanced placement history course following recent moves in other states where groups are also challenging academic curricula. We've talked about the Texas efforts to rewrite history books, rewrite social studies, completely upend what we see as the proper and fact-based history and reality of our existence as humans. Texas has fought long and hard now to change that in terms of what we teach children, and conservatives are now arguing that the advanced placement U.S. history class needs to go because it contains anti-U.S. bias, anti-American bias. If the Board of Education approves the initiative, the students will not be taught the national AP history test. Previously, the board passed a measure stating that the history curriculum can outdo the material covered in the framework for a nationwide AP history class. Students, of course, finish AP classes with a test which can then be used for college credit. When I was in high school, I took advanced placement microeconomics. I took the test. I was then given credit in college for that class. It truly started me. It was challenging but interesting, and it started me on a path to take economics as a major in undergraduate, to obtain an MBA with a concentration in economics. These are really valuable things, Lewis. And because of political bias, Texas continues to just destroy what children are learning.
I guess we could call it the war on education. I'm not sure how else to describe it, but it's Texas seems to be the forefront of this war, at the forefront of this war.
It is, and indeed.
It's embarrassing to say that I live in Texas with things like this happening. But you're right. It's very unfortunate, and I hope these efforts fail. It's
not only Texas, although Texas, because of its influence over the book publishing industry, has a lot of influence. Back in 2010 in Virginia, schools distributed a new history textbook which published claims dismissed by historians that, quote, thousands of Southern blacks also fought in the Confederate ranks during the American Civil War. Just nonsense, Lewis, being published under the auspices of making it seem like radical right-wing movements were actually not that bad, and that secular history or liberal history were actually somehow conservative influences, conservative movements. It's so plain and open and bold what they're doing. It's not really tricking anybody, but the right-wingers in Texas seem to be absolutely loving it.
Unfortunately, if this keeps up, it's going to trick the children, and we will just be breeding ignorance, and I don't see the benefit of that.
Michelle wrote to me and said, David, I just read this story online. It's dated September 18th. I find it very disturbing and was wondering if you could look into it and maybe discuss it on your show. This can't and shouldn't happen. A militia group in Wisconsin is planning to target African-American Democrats at voting places in order to suppress the vote and keep Republican Governor Scott Walker in office. Here's a Twitter exchange where the group details their plan. They say, Wisconsin Poll Watcher Militia is the name of it. They say, we prefer our people be armed. Some will be heading to some of Milwaukee, Racine, and Beloit's worst areas. We will be armed with a list of people to look for at each location. Patrick Murray then writes, just so you're aware, I will not report any Republicans, only Democrats, to which Wisconsin Poll Watcher Militia adds, we will be targeting heavy Democrat districts, so it is doubtful this will even be an issue. And Patrick Murray says they have a look about them too. If you go to the group's Facebook page and you will take a look at the pictures, you will very quickly see that what they are talking about, the look they are talking about that these Democratic voters have that they suspect of being invalid voters, are black people, Lewis. They are just flat out black people. We need a real investigation into this group. Any movement that is targeting specific groups based on, for example, race, is looking to do something that is unconstitutional. The group combining their Twitter messages and the pictures on their Facebook page clearly is out there specifically to keep black Democrats from voting. This is absolutely disgusting.
Things are going to get interesting when certain black groups show up to these same polling places and confront this militia. And I predict that if that happens, the poop could hit the fan.
This is truly a violation of the Voting Rights Act. We have a group here that is targeting a specific group of individuals based on race and perceived political affiliation. According to the Justice Department, quote, the administration of elections is chiefly a function of state government. However, federal authorities may become involved when there are possible violations of federal law. In cases of coercion, intimidation, or threats made in an attempt to intimidate, threaten, or coerce anyone who is attempting to vote or voting, the federal government, the Department of Justice, can consider whether they would have federal jurisdiction to bring claims. That absolutely needs to happen. It is time to send a message that these tactics will not be tolerated in Wisconsin. I recommend calling the voting section of the Department of Justice. Their number is 202-307-2767. You can call them toll-free at 800-253-3931. Tell them that there is this group in Wisconsin called the Wisconsin Poll Watcher Militia. The evidence is public that they are targeting Democrats, perceived Democrats, and they are targeting those who appear to be African American, whether or not they are. We've got to activate around this, Lewis, and we need to stop. You know, the Republican Party knows that they have public opinion on the issues against them. They have demographics against them, and they are getting increasingly desperate to prevent Democrats from voting.
And I love to see this desperation because it means that they think they're going to lose the battle if they don't act. So, yes, this is completely despicable. Let's shut it down.
Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by former New Jersey State Assemblyman Louis Manzo. He is the author of Ruthless Ambition, where he says he reveals Chris Christie's corruption. It's really a pleasure to have you on today. I want to go back, I guess, to what could be arguably the beginning of this story, back to 2009 and your arrest in July. Let's start there. What happened then?
Well, I was in the mayoral race for Jersey City mayor back in May. In July, I get a call from the FBI saying there's a warrant out for my arrest. I drove up. I was on vacation, actually, at the time. I drove up to Newark to turn myself in, and I find out that I was being prosecuted by the federal government on a sting. It was the largest public corruption sting in New Jersey's history, known as Bid Rig 3. I was arrested, and it began a 4-year ordeal for me, which turned out as I knew it would. I was innocent. I was falsely accused. It cost me my life savings, my business, and my home. And what I've done is basically spend the last 5 years not only defending myself, but researching and putting this document together, which is vitally important to every American.
Broadly speaking, the 44 arrests that happened on July 23rd included everything from bribery allegations to trafficking body parts. What specifically were the crimes alleged against you?
That I took a bribe in exchange for promising to do a development deal for a campaign contributor. I never took any money from him. The government knew that, as we found out in discovery afterwards, and basically 6 other people in the case also had their charges thrown out, as you know, as mine were, because the prosecutors overcharged. And basically, an astonishing fact that I found out was that in 97% of the cases brought by federal prosecutors, when they indict, people plead guilty. Prosecutors know that because people don't have the financial ability or the mental or health wherewithal to withstand a federal prosecution. So prosecutors, knowing this, overcharge and basically have the ability to shoot fish in a barrel.
Why do you believe that there were these arrests made? In other words, do you believe there was a political goal? Was it that explicit?
Well, 3 whistleblowers from the office of the prosecutor came forward in October of that year and told the New York Times that the arrests went down basically to help Governor Christie's election to governor. He was running for governor that year. He put the sting in place, and prosecutors within the office that he appointed were directing the sting. That's what the federal prosecutors said, and that's what the documents and evidence in Ruthless Ambition, my book, prove.
And do you believe, well, let me ask it a different way. What do you believe to be Chris Christie's specific involvement in this operation?
He knowingly used a confidential informant who was mentally incapable. They withheld that information from attorneys. He gave this this informant a plea deal unenvied by any other confidential informant in the country. And further, he used his office, as the book reveals, prior to Bid Rig 3. He had been using his office both to prosecute potential threats to his running for governor and also to help finance his campaign for governor.
Have individuals that were involved in this entire operation subsequently gone to work in some form or another for the Christie administration?
About 15 of the prosecutors who were directly or indirectly directly involved with the Bid Rig 3 prosecutions and were actually donating money to his campaign, another violation of U.S. Attorney guidelines, went to work in his administration. Mainly, the acting U.S. Attorney he appointed, Ralph Mara, who wound up with a six-figure job as the head of the Sports Authority in New Jersey, and Michelle Brown, the first assistant U.S. attorney, who, while she's prosecuting these cases, also has an outstanding $40,000 loan to Christie that she never disclosed in violation of the law. Christie never disclosed it, also in violation of the law. And she was the one who was ordering the arrest and directing the prosecutors not only on how to conduct the investigation, but also on destroying evidence.
Let's say that we kind of can all generally connect the dots as far as the reasoning for why Chris Christie would benefit from this type of operation. What's your assessment of why all of the players that were kind of, I don't want to use the term taking orders, but that were subordinates or cogs in the wheel, so to speak, what was their motivation to just go along with this rather than potentially blow the whistle as it was going on? Was it fear? Was it financial or political incentives?
It was political and financial incentives. Those who said nothing, it was fear. And there were, remember, there were three at least who did do their due diligence and came forward and told and spoke about what happened. During my case, and the 4 years of my case lingering through the courts, we had numerous documents that were dumped on my doorstep, actually, from inside the federal prosecutor's office, which were highly incriminating of criminal conduct on the part of these prosecutors, which is why they never wanted to bring my case to court.
I went into researching your book and your allegations with some skepticism because so often, as I'm sure you know, we hear of stories where whether it's a Democrat criticizing a Republican or vice versa, after the fact, after some kind of political loss, really just seems to have an axe to grind. And the more research I did into your book and the more documents, specific documents that you source and offer and that are available, my skepticism, I couldn't keep my skepticism, that skepticism that I use when I go into every interview. And while we don't have a definitive causal relationship here, the correlations and the documentation are so incriminating that it's hard to see this any other way.
It is. And what people don't realize is that what the prosecutors also knew is that federal prosecutors don't eat their own. So basically, they break the law with impunity. The USA Today has done a stellar job over the last 2 years in bringing out cases upon cases, hundreds of cases of prosecutorial misconduct throughout the country. A federal district court in the ninth district, the United States Chief Justice there said basically it's epidemic throughout the country what's going on. It's not Democrat, Republican. It's just prosecutors now using politics, if you will, to advance causes, and it's sickening, and it's something that needs to be tackled by the American people.
In the last bit of time we have left, over the last many years, we've talked a lot about New Jersey corruption, and I don't remember the number offhand, but some huge disproportionate number of all U.S. governors that have been indicted for corruption have been from New Jersey. What's your assessment as someone who was a state assemblyman in New Jersey of where this culture of corruption comes from within that state?
Well, I don't know if it's a culture, because when you look at the arrests around public corruption in New Jersey, most of them are crimes created by the federal government to ensnare public officials, usually on the others, of the other party. So basically, and I saw this in Bidrick 3, it was a totally fixed sting, if you will, illegally put together. And again, the prosecutors know 97% of the time the people are going to plead. So I don't think there's legitimate corruption. Legitimate corruption to me is someone reporting corruption to the FBI, them coming in and investigating it.
But even still, even if we're talking about whether charges are inflated or not by the federal government, we see that at least at the office of the governor, it's disproportionate in New Jersey. Is there any sense from you? Is there any way that you interpret or synthesize that?
Look, I know that there were charges about McGreevey, the previous governor, and that was all political. And I bring part of that out in my book. A lot of that was politics on Christie's part. He wanted to run for governor actually in 2005. There was incidents with John Khorasan. I was there then, and yes, there were problems. They didn't wind up to the level of being corrupt there, but he was doing things that weren't ethically appropriate, with handing contracts out to firms in Wall Street who he had connections with and who people were investing in, like the selling of the New Jersey Turnpike he was trying to do.
We've been speaking with former New Jersey State Assemblyman Louis Manzo. The book is Ruthless Ambition. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me and for the opportunity, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've been speaking out for some months now against having the 2022 World Cup in the country of Qatar. We've talked about the subjugation of women. We've talked about it being essentially a slave state. And of course, that doesn't even consider the fact that Qatar seems to have been selected as the result of blatant corruption. Not for any of these reasons, but merely because it seems like it's just going to be kind of too hot to have a World Cup there. We now have heard from FIFA Executive Committee member Theo Zwanziger, who says that the World Cup in 2022 will not be held in Qatar. This is not an official determination. This is his view that based on the conversations he's had, he doesn't believe the World Cup will be held there. Louis, it's not for the reasons that we wanted, but it's still a really good bit of news if it ends up being true.
Do we think that the corruption chart, the corruption stuff and all of that surrounding this is still somewhat influencing this decision?
I really don't know. If it is, I would much rather just hear that that FIFA is upfront about it, and then they say, you know what, this is what happened and it was a mistake. Of course, admitting that there was corruption would be an absolute disaster for the organization. And a lot of these big sports organizations, we've been talking about the NFL having serious issues. We've talked about the International Olympic Committee, and now it's FIFA. The issues seem to continue mounting. And a quote from the former German football chief, who's now a member of FIFA, quote, "Medics say they cannot accept responsibility with a World Cup taking place under these conditions." I understand that, and that makes sense. But really, Qatar is just not a place that should be rewarded with any kind of international sporting event at this point. Different reasons, but I am still happy. Hopefully, Louis, at some point soon, we get actual confirmation that the World Cup will not be in Qatar in 2022.
I think it will happen. And luckily for FIFA, once that announcement comes, people will probably stop looking into all these corruption accusations, which I think would be great for FIFA.
I mentioned that we were back in Massachusetts over the weekend for a friend's wedding. And Louis, I don't think I got to tell you this. This is a really bizarre thing. In big cities, you walk by panhandlers or those who maybe are just mentally ill on the street, and very often you never see those individuals again. In Northampton, Massachusetts, which is a very small city, you often see the same panhandlers, the same individuals who are on the street either talking to people or asking for money or playing an instrument or simply hanging around. You see the same people many, many times. And over the last 8 or 10 years, there's a guy who I've seen in one particular neighborhood in Northampton, Massachusetts, who I recognize, and sometimes I can't tell if he's associated with a particular store because he's often sitting out in front of a particular store. Sometimes I don't know if this is a guy who is just panhandling but is not doing a very good job of actually talking to people. I don't know exactly what his status is, but needless to say, I've observed this guy over probably the last 8 to 10 years. And over the weekend, I was walking with my laptop bag and just kind of doing my own thing and walking. And I hear the guy say something, and I assume, oh, it's this guy who always talks to himself. I don't know what he's saying. And then something he says catches my ear, and I realize that he's making a political statement. And what he said made me wonder, does this guy always talk about political media? Or does this guy, who I thought was either a panhandler or someone who was just mentally ill on the street, is this guy aware of me and aware of my program? Because what he said as I walked by, and it was in the same tone, in the same way that you would hear the rantings of a lunatic, he said very clearly and concisely, kind of to himself, not looking at me, but loudly enough for me to hear, you should talk to Michael Savage. He's a conservative. He has a different point of view. And I walked past and I said, wait a second. Is he talking to me as David Pakman, host of The David Pakman Show, and suggesting that for balance I interview Michael Savage? Or is it just by mere chance that I overheard him stating this with absolutely no awareness that I was walking by, that I host a political TV show? In other words, does he talk about Michael Savage to everybody? Or was I being addressed as the host of The David Pakman Show? Amazing, Lewis.
You should have asked them.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't. I mean, I think by the time I put it all together, I was already half a block away. And at that point, I said, I'm not going to go back and say, excuse me, sir, when you said that thing about Michael Savage, were you speaking to me or not? Maybe you're right. Maybe I should have done that. And realistically, Lewis, I'm probably going to walk by this guy again next time I'm in Northampton. So maybe I'll ask him at that point. But just what are the odds, you know?
Yeah, that's very strange. I mean, is he watching this clip right now? I mean, you never know. Yeah, and if he is, hopefully he won't take offense to anything that I said, because I did not mean any offense by it. But very unusual situation. The things that happen, Lewis, when we go back to Massachusetts, it's the stuff of legends. There's no question about that. We have a voicemail number, 219-2DavidP, but today, instead of playing voicemails, I actually have an email I want to read to you. We've been talking about Olive Garden and Darden Restaurants, the parent company, quite a bit. And after we issued a critique based on a hedge fund, which said, you know, Olive Garden is not even salting their pasta water, which is insane because they want to keep an extended warranty on their pots, I got an email from a chef at Olive Garden. I don't know if they're considered chefs, cooks, or whatever they're called. And he said, David, I would like you to know that I've worked at Olive Garden for 5 years. I started out as a cook, working at a new restaurant, then working my way up to culinary assistant, and then to culinary professional, a job where I lead the kitchen. I have opened 2 new Olive Gardens as the opening trainer. Olive Garden is the best thing that ever happened to me. They treat their employees very well. I get paid more than I ever could at a factory job, and I get paid vacation as well as benefits. Our food is made from fresh ingredients every morning. The fresh ingredients are delivered several times a week. You were wrong about the reason we don't salt our pasta water. The pasta is not cooked in pots. We only have 1 pot in the entire restaurant. It's cooked in machines that hold about 10 gallons of water at a boil and constantly flush themselves with fresh water to wash away starch. We can't add salt because it would be flushed away before it has time to impart any flavor. Water without starch is more important to the quality of pasta than salt is. The flavor of pasta comes from the sauce, which has plenty of, but not too much, salt. I hope you'll reconsider the verdict you so hastily gave us. You know, I did more research into this, and I still, Lewis, maintain that the food at Olive Garden is a disaster. It is overpriced. It is more expensive than actual Italian food, and pasta water should be salted, although I have no qualms whatsoever
with believing what this person is telling me, which is that employment at Olive Garden has been a really good thing for him.
Hey, if this helped you, if this was a good thing for you, good. But don't tell us that the food is good or great. It's not. It just isn't.
And if it were really cheap, I would understand going to Olive Garden, but it is often more expensive than local, authentic Italian restaurants. On today's bonus show, implanting a third breast, MIT is working on new spacesuits, and the world's first powered submarine came much longer ago than many would have imagined. davidpakman.com/membership. Become a member. Get the bonus show. Talk to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.